As you all know, we are in the middle of the worst national economic crisis since the Great Depression. We had a state budget crisis before the national downturn, and now it's obviously much worse. All of this has taken place in an era when the state has been reducing its share of education costs, placing an even greater burden on the local property taxpayers every year. In light of this reality, I made a call to all Providence stakeholders to come forward in the spirit of shared sacrifice, and I have, in a series of different ways, done that as the leader of this city. In addition to the 445 positions that we have cut over the last several years, the operational changes we've made in city government functions, the efficiencies that we have implemented, and the structural reforms that we have implemented and fought for, and the changes that I've made, particularly to non-union employees, everyone has asked to come forward to make a set of sacrifices. I've extended the furlough days, I've imposed a wage freeze, I've instituted a 20% co-share for all non-union employees effective July 1. I've asked our city unions to come forward with the same kinds of measures, and our largest city union, the Laborers Local 1033, led the way. Today I am glad to report that the Providence Teachers Union ratified a tentative agreement in which they also heeded this call for shared sacrifices. The teachers stepped up to this request by a vote of 947 to 73, and I certainly urge the members of the Providence School Board to ratify this contract. The contract includes an increase in co-payments to 15% for health care going forward, which will save the Providence taxpayers $1.5 million every year. Under this tentative agreement, which covers the years 2008 to 2010, the teachers have accepted a wage freeze for 2010. For the 2 years that have already passed, they will be compensated at a rate of 1.5% increase per year, which is in line with our other union contracts and obviously well under the rate of inflation. As you know, teachers are also likely to see pension modifications since they are in the state pension system. These are real savings for the taxpayers of our city, and I really want to thank the Providence teachers for coming forward at this really important time. To the other public employee unions and to the other stakeholders in this city, such as our large tax-exempt institutions, I would only repeat again what I have said, and that is that these are extraordinary times and that no one is exempt from participating in this shared sacrifice for the well-being of our city. So in addition to announcing the agreement, the tentative agreement, the teachers contract, I also wanted to spend a moment to talk about the decisions of the General Assembly last night in the budget that they passed early this morning. Let me begin by saying that I'm very disappointed by this budget. If there was ever a year for fundamental change in the way things are done here in our state, this was the year. Unfortunately, too many of the decisions that made up this budget were just like the ones that got Rhode Island into this situation in the first place. To be more specific, there were 5 moments when there was a chance for the kind of change that we need, and these opportunities were missed at the General Assembly. I point them out with the hope that we might be able to avoid them in the future and to make the point to residents of our city that there were other options on the table. First, the stimulus, and to me this is the original sin of the budget. The decision to block funds from reaching their intended destination, our children in their classrooms, was especially disappointing. But arguably worse was the fact that it was used instead to place a one-year Band-Aid over the long-term real problem that we'll see again next year in an even more ominous form. Second is the set of tools that the mayors requested, mayors from all across our state. The governor and General Assembly did indeed make it clear that funds to cities and towns were in jeopardy. So Rhode Island's mayors and town administrators asked for tools, legislative reforms, so that we could better manage workforce and generate savings. They were included in the original budget submission, but the General Assembly removed them. These would not have added another dime to the state budget, but would have produced real savings to cities and towns. Third, the flat tax. The greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression was partially caused by an ideology that says giving money to rich investors will benefit everybody. But in the middle of this crisis, this budget preserves a multi-million-dollar tax cut to the wealthiest tax filers in our state at the expense of working Rhode Islanders. Fourth, Rhode Island depends more on local property taxes to pay for services than every other state in America but one. Property taxes place an unfair burden on lower income residents, and this budget eliminates in its entirety general revenue sharing. Funds that are intended to go back to be returned to local cities and towns to support services to the residents and families who live in cities and towns as a partial return on the revenues that they generate to the state. And an effort to freeze that flat tax in order to restore some of these funds was also defeated last night. Fifth, education funding. Rhode Island is the only state in America without a predictable and fair funding formula that determines our state's largest and most important investment, school funding. In recent years, the cost of education has increased while the level of support from the state has not. This year, funds were cut to education, and still we have no education formula in place. These were 5 opportunities to rise to the challenge presented by these times, and I'm disappointed that they were all missed. Of course, there's still some time in the process, but every indication is that the budget will pass through the Senate as well. I will continue in these final days to urge passage of our fair share legislation, which would allow local cities and towns to ensure that the largest tax-exempt institutions, those with real estate in excess of $20 million, pay their fair share. But with this process behind us, that is the budget process, now it is time for me as mayor of the city to go out to our residents and talk to them about this budget, about the consequences for city services and city revenues. And the week after next, I will hold discussions in all 4 quadrants of the city to discuss these extraordinarily difficult times, what they will mean to the residents of this city, what they will mean in terms of city services and our city budget. And I think Karen has a list of what those dates are and where they will be, and they'll start the week after next.
So was the general